things happen because this community has power.
All of these things you could tie and connect to climate change.
There really needs to be a cultural shift.
We have a lot to learn from our Native American friends.
Shifting the power back into the hands of people who have been marginalized. This is how we celebrate life.
Good afternoon and welcome, Climate Week community. My name is Jill Tidman and I am the Executive Director of the Redford Center. I am thrilled to be joining you all today for Getting from Point A to Point Clean, the community movements powering the clean transportation revolution. And before I introduce our work, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous land we are on. As visitors on this land, we must remain committed to working against colonialism and towards reconciliation, deepening our understanding of Indigenous perspectives and reframing our responsibilities to the places and the planet where we all live. I am joining today from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We acknowledge the city of San Francisco as a city with a rich yet complex history of systemic inequities and a growing threat of gentrification that has resulted in the declining presence of a thriving Black community and a growing presence of a displaced, houseless population. We remain committed to supporting and centering these communities and all other historically excluded and displaced communities in our everyday work and actions. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and present, and to consider how we can each, in our own way, move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I invite you to share which lands you are tuning in from in the virtual chat. It is an honor to come together today to share ideas, solutions, hope, and inspiration. You are about to hear from a panel of individuals that beautifully embody the Redford Center's vision and mission. But for those of you who are not familiar with us, we are an independent, nonprofit organization that seeks to advance environmental solutions through the power of stories that move. When we build connections through stories, we eliminate the barriers of political, academic, and industry echo chambers. We help shrink the distance and division of borders and the gaps between age, experience, and status. And we create an inclusive pathway of understanding that is guided by the most impacted among us. This belief system is directly inspired by the vision of our co-founders, actor, filmmaker, and activist Robert Redford, and his late son, the filmmaker and activist James Redford, two visionary storytellers and proud environmentalists whose deep commitment and love for people and the planet spurred the formation of the Redford Center back in 2005. Since then, it has been our mission to put a spotlight on the topics, communities, and stories that the mainstream film industry has overlooked or underestimated. By supporting seasoned and emerging filmmakers and giving a platform to frontline and youth voices, collaborating with community partners and working with film teams to envision compelling impact campaigns, we are not only building a more promising future for the film industry, but for our planet too. Our future has never looked brighter and more hopeful than when we connect in moments like this. Thank you all for being here today and for choosing to spend your time with us. Thank you to our amazing speakers and to our colleague, Linda Samara, who is hosting this roundtable on our behalf. And thank you to the organizers of Climate Week for making this all possible and creating space for this conversation. We hope you enjoy our session, and we look forward to continuing to build community with you.
In the US, nearly half of all trips are shorter than 3 miles, which is about a 20-minute bike ride, and at least 20% of trips are within a 20-minute walk. If we can plan and design our towns and cities in a way that made these safe and enjoyable options for travel, we could minimize trips made in single occupancy vehicles and significantly cut emissions. Let's take a look at what steps 3 people are taking towards this goal on a community level in Trenton, New Jersey.
So the city of Trenton is primed to be bikeable and walkable. It's 8 square miles. It's relatively flat and quite dense. However, getting around can be a challenge at times.
This is Jacques, president of Trenton Cycling Revolution, a community organization dedicated to making biking and walking viable alternatives to driving in the city.
Car-centric infrastructure and redlining has made it difficult for people to get around. There are still portions of our city that don't have sidewalks, bike lanes, or even crosswalks.
Now these might seem like small things, but they're exactly the kind of infrastructure that adds up to make a bikeable and walkable city.
So for the past 2 decades, we've been working hard to change this. In 2018, we cut the ribbon on a new bike lane that is going to reconnect 2 major trails.
This is Sherelle. Along with the East Trenton Collaborative, she's been working with residents to reimagine their streets.
Every weekend for 1 month, did an open street event where people can come out of their homes and take ownership of their streets. We had vendors, we had music, we had hot dogs, we had hamburgers, we had bike repair shops, and we stopped the cars from traveling. It was incredible. When we figured out what we could do, the residents start to realize other things they can get done. They got a petition. They sent that petition back to the city hall. We have speed bumps now on this street, so now the cars have to slow down. That's power. That's residents taking power.
I've been helping people fix their bikes in the city of Trenton for about 10 years, and being at the Open Streets events in East Trenton has been a great way to meet new people, make connections, and get people rolling.
This is Wills, Director of Operations at Trenton Cycling Revolution.
So Trenton Cycling Revolution was running a pop-up bike repair station at an Open Streets event put on by the East Trenton Collaborative, and we realized we could join forces to make this happen all year round at an actual physical space. This year we've started renovating a garage at the East Trenton Collaborative, and we're turning it into a space where people can come and use the tools, get parts, and fix their bike up so they can get where they need to go.
Well, we're all going to be very good at carrying bikes up and downstairs.
For many folks in Trenton, a bicycle is not recreation, it's transportation. So that means getting to school, getting to work, going to the store, and we want to just make sure that everybody can do that safely and efficiently as possible.
The grassroots efforts in Trenton to make the city more bikeable and walkable are great examples of things we can all be doing in our own communities. If we can reorient our transportation systems to be less dependent on cars, we'll have made significant steps towards protecting our planet, and we'll be living happier and healthier lives.
Hello, Climate Week. Welcome to Getting from Point A to Point Clean, the community movements powering the clean transportation revolution. My name is Linda Samata, and I am the communications officer at the Redford Center, and I'm also so thrilled to be your moderator for today. You all just watched Community Power New Jersey, Our Streets, a short film that's a part of the Redford Center's Community Power short film series created in partnership with CHISPA, League of Conservation Voters, and Far Star Action Fund. Our short film series was created to get folks thinking about the way we move around our cities and the impact you and I can have on the planet and our communities. Research shows that over 40% of Americans are living in places with significant levels of ozone and particle pollution. And it's no surprise that Black and Indigenous communities and communities of color are over 3 times more likely to be breathing the most polluted air, bearing the brunt of the health, social, and economic impacts of pollution and climate change. One critical pathway towards environmental health and justice is the movement away from high-polluting vehicles to cleaner alternatives. But why is the solution so commonly reduced to an issue of individual consumer choice? We hear it all the time. Buy an electric car, carpool, or take the bus. But let's be real. While these options are a really good start, they're not the most accessible, and they too often rely on forcing our communities to work within an infrastructure that clearly isn't built with an equitable or human-centered approach. So why limit ourselves to a dominant narrative or solution that seems to start and stop within the limits of the status quo when we could be imagining bold solutions that meet the climate crisis with the innovation and urgency it demands? Right now, we're already witnessing the devastating impacts of climate change in Puerto Rico, Pakistan, China, Mississippi, and almost every corner of the world. And the solutions you'll hear about today and the spirit of community power feels more urgent and more connected than ever. So it's time to be bold, to be imaginative, to break the status quo and begin thinking outside of the imposed cultural mindset of individualism and lean wholeheartedly into community. Our Community Power short film series spotlights communities across the country doing just that, leaning into each other, uplifting one another, and meeting our environmental injustices with tenacity, innovation, passion, and bravery. Before we move into our roundtable discussion, I want to give you all just another glimpse of what's possible when we harness our community power.
To become aware that this new future that is already here is not happening if it's not with the community power.
We have to check a website to make sure that he can go outside that day. The website will tell us if it's clear for him to go out, it'll be green. If he can't go out, it's red and he has to stay inside whether he likes it or not. Sometimes it's so severe that he wakes up in the middle of the night and he can't catch his breath, so it's like rushing over to him when he's making those breathing, wheezing sounds and putting the machine on again and hoping that his lungs will open up and he can breathe again.
Recently, the American Lung Association produced a report on the quality of air. And Maricopa County came out as one of the top 10 most polluted counties in the whole country. So we organized a group of moms called the Cartwright Moms, along with Theo, organized community members in that Cartwright school district. And together we advocated for a school bond to pass. It was a $60 million school bond that passed in 2020, which would give money to the district to support their infrastructure, to support their buildings, to support renewing their bus fleet. Not only do we need electric school buses, but in order for school buses to survive and to actually thrive, they need good infrastructure.
Having this electric school bus is the confirmation that things happen because this community has power. Don't be afraid, because once the community knows that there is power there, they will exercise that power.
According to the American Lung Association, the air quality here in Nevada is an F.
We did a project with the air quality monitors where we went into different areas of the city. The air quality is usually worse in Latino communities or just communities that don't have a lot of funding, which means more illnesses such as asthma or just lung diseases that can come from that.
Our members decided to organize themselves, both the younger and older generations, in very creative and cool and different ways.
Queremos empoderar precisamente a nuestra comunidad para que también luche por la conservación del medio ambiente. Necesitamos que la gente esté consciente que todos estamos contaminando de alguna manera.
Our community here in Southern Nevada has always led by unity. Whatever the situation is, we are going to be here for each other and we're going to support each other and we're going to make sure that we are fighting for our future and for our future generations.
Typically, the first out-of-home activity is a trip. So how can we make it so that you start the day with happiness? If we want to promote greener transportation modes, we want to make sure that when people utilizing those modes, they also feel happy.
This should be a service that works from the beginning all the way through the end, not just the bus is safe, but how is waiting for the bus safe.
We collected data from Minneapolis St. Paul residents. And we were able to produce a transportation happiness map.
A large percentage of our environment is actually what influences our ability to be healthy, and we really can't understate the role of transportation in that space.
We hope that in the future, government agencies will be interested in utilizing our technology so that they can invest in aspects of the built environment that can promote positive emotional well-being. Because in the end, our dream is to design with the community rather than design for the community.
Our conversation today is not only inspired by, but also brought to you by the communities, storytellers, researchers, and activists behind this film series. I'm so honored and humbled to introduce and be joined by Hannah Krieger, the Senior Program Manager of Climate Equity at the Greenlining Institute, Laura Kate Bender, the National Assistant Vice President of Healthy Air at the American Lung Association, Pita Juarez, the National Communications and Strategies Director at CHISPA and League of Conservation Voters, and a critically acclaimed director and producer, Sonia Chesna, the Director of Active Transportation at the Tri-State Transportation Campaign, and a producer and owner of the Trenton-based production company Sourland Studios, and Dr. Yingling Fan, the Professor of Urban and Regional Planning at the Humphrey School for Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota and Research Scholar at the Center for Transportation Studies. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to our speakers today. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'd love for us to take a moment to let the audience get to know you a little bit. So can you each please tell us a little bit about yourself and also share your personal definition of clean transportation?
I'm happy to start. Hi, Laura Kate Bender, National Assistant Vice President for Healthy Air at the American Lung Association. I work out of our DC office on clean air and climate advocacy at the federal level. But also at the community level, I've really grown to appreciate my access in my community to trails and to green outdoor spaces as I've taken up running again this past summer. I would never have been able to log the miles I have if I didn't have access to leafy, safe green trails. And I've really come to understand that that's not what everyone has. My personal definition of clean transportation and the Lung Association's is zero emission. Transportation that does not pollute. Our unofficial motto around the Lung Association is don't burn stuff. And that applies to our vehicles and of course, access to options that don't require vehicles at all.
I'm happy to be the second. Hi, everybody. My name is Yingling Fan. I'm a professor of urban and regional planning at the University of Minnesota. My research focuses on designing and creating transportation solutions that are human-centered and very much recognize the connections between transportation with the environmental sustainability, with the social equity, as well as human health. And so essentially it's about creating transportation solutions to build more sustainable, healthier, as well as more equitable communities and cities. Clean transportation to me is a healthy transportation, healthy for both the planet and the people. And I think a clean transportation is a sweet spot where we can link planetary health with the human health. It is an area that we can promote synergistic co-benefits between environmental sustainability and human health.
Happy to go next. Hey everyone, my name is Sonia Strensna. I'm a filmmaker and the director of active transportation at the Tri-State Transportation Campaign. Tri-State is a nonprofit organization dedicated to mobility, accessibility, and livability in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And we use data and policy analysis along with strategic media outreach and community organizing to influence decision-making throughout the region. To me, bicycling, walking, and rolling have always been at the core of my concept for clean transportation because they are inherently emissions-free. Unless you think about what you ate to be able to do those things. But I think the definition of clean transportation also expands to looking at how much space we give to vehicles versus how much space we give to people. And that land use has serious impacts on people's health, well-being, and community life. So it's, of course, also prioritizing public transit and clean vehicles, but people's feet or wheels are the cleanest form of transportation.
I can go. Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Juarez. Like Linda said, I'm the National Communications Director with CHISPA. We are a Latinx organizing program, a program of the League of Conservation Voters. So we are, for me, clean transportation means equitable transportation, where, our biggest campaign has been with the electric school buses and having moms, undocumented moms who are putting these events together, who are bringing community together for the future of their children, is a reason we were so motivated to document it. As a filmmaker, bringing the love of my passion for environmental justice and filmmaking together was just beautiful. And so happy that we were able to share and be a part of this series with Power the Vote in Redford Center.
Hi, folks. Hannah Krieger, Senior Program Manager of Climate Equity at the Greenlining Institute. Yeah, I would definitely say, for years, my identity was someone who never had a car. I was very fortunate to grow up in a community where that was possible. And I will admit, just 2 months ago, I became a car owner for the first time, and I've been having a bit of an identity crisis around it. I feel kind of guilty, conflicted, a little bit judgmental towards myself. But I will admit, having a car for certain purposes is so damn convenient. And I'm very lucky I was able to purchase an electric car. And so I'm just sharing this experience to highlight that, yes, our goals are all to reduce car dependency, to create bikeable, walkable cities. We also need to be balancing, those goals with what people say is presently the most efficient way to get them to work, school, healthcare, and recreation. And particularly for low-income folks of color who just have fewer options available to them, who are being displaced out of cities into car-dependent suburbs, who face really unsafe biking and walking infrastructure. And so, from this, I'd just like to highlight that I think clean transportation is so inherently multimodal. It has to be, right? It's whatever mode best meets the moment. There's never going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. And so as a result, Greenlining, as a racial equity advocacy organization, we are agnostic to the mode as long as it's clean. We're not specifically focused on one mobility option. We advocate for policies, programs, and funding streams that will provide whatever combination of clean mobility options communities say they want and need, whether that's walking, biking, public transit, shared mobility, electric vehicles, or whatever the hell comes next.
Amazing. Yes, it's so clear that there's just so many definitions of what transportation and clean transportation look like. And I think for so many of us, getting around is just such a habitual and routine part of our days that we really don't think much about it. But, more and more of these conversations are happening, and we're starting to think about the social impacts and accessibility barriers of the current modes of transportation we have available to us. And we're also thinking about how the infrastructure development that we're pushing for can oftentimes be laced with the threat of gentrification and displacement, like you all said. So in your opinion, as it exists today, how can our transportation options be improved? And how can we guarantee that this movement honors equity, accessibility, and responds to the known disparities that exist? Yeah, I'll give you a minute to think about that, but feel free to jump in whenever you feel called to.
I can start again. So I do want to make a bit of a separate point. Of course, we need to clean up the way that people have the ability to move themselves around. We also need to make sure that we're cleaning up the way we move our stuff around. I think there's a lot of focus on, in general, when you hear about transportation from pollution, I'd say we hear a lot about car pollution, but trucks are enormous contributors to unhealthy air pollution levels and environmental injustice at a far greater rate than cars. And so it's not only do people need access to be able to get themselves around in a way that is healthy and efficient and fun. But they also need ways to not be living near a port that's impacted by heavy diesel traffic, or living near a warehouse or distribution center. In fact, even in the pandemic, some places actually saw increased air pollution, even as we all who had the ability to stop driving to work, because of so much goods movement powered by diesel trucks. And so we need to build out infrastructure, not just for light duty, but also heavy duty vehicles, so that we can help communities that are impacted.
Happy to go next. I work with practitioner and the policymakers a lot in the transportation area. As a researcher, I think I help them to look at their kind of a performance metric they use when it comes to evaluate transportation projects. I think it's very important that we have a new performance metric to evaluating the effectiveness of transportation solutions. And this new performance metric has to be human-centered or community-centered, and the community needs to be involved when designing those performance measures. Traditionally, in transportation, the performance has heavily focused on efficiency, right? Less congestion, and higher speed, greater ease to get from point A to point B. But what about the human experience when people getting from point A to point B? And this human experience could include, for example, I think Laura just mentioned, is that will people be exposed to all kinds of environmental hazards or even safety risks as they're getting from point A to point B. Also about whether people are able to get direct health benefits by using a particular transportation mode, getting from point A to point B. So for example, we all know that there is a connection between driving, being a passenger, and physical inactivity, the sedentary behavior that we have, right? We have a BCD pandemic actually in the United States. So there is direct health benefits associated with utilizing more active transportation modes. And also there is a mental health aspect, right? When you utilizing private car to get from point A to point B, how would you feel, right? Do you feel connected with the surrounding communities, right? Are there social interactions that you can make, right? So I think all those are important questions for us to, try to answer. And certainly, I think other practitioners and the policymakers in the field of transportation need to think about how we, what defines successful, transportation solutions.
I'll just build on that. Like, I think, as the speakers have said, like, our transportation options really need to be improved by centering the needs of people in communities. So it's an exciting time to be engaged in this work because there is a lot of funding out there right now, but it's critical that like the people making the decisions are the people living in those places. And the planning process hasn't always actually considered that. So from a planning perspective, planners need to get out there and actually talk to residents. They need to hear their voices. Residents are the ones that are going to be able to tell planners what hard data can't. Where are there near misses? Where are there near crashes? Where does it feel uncomfortable to walk? Where are streetlights out? People involved in the process of shaping their neighborhoods will have a greater care for it and also just do a better job of planning their cities. So we really need to have their voices heard, but at the same time, from an advocacy perspective, we need to be intersectional, and we need to be, if we're a transportation org, we need to be working with our partners in housing and making sure affordable housing options are available. And all of these are layered on top of each other. So it's definitely not a one size fits all option, but making sure that we have public processes that really honor different shifts in working, parents, we need childcare at these events. We need to provide meals, hybrid options. There are so many ways planners can engage more community members in the process. We really need to be demanding that they do that.
I'm happy to go next. Yeah, I think it's important to remember that our transportation system, our mobility options have largely been chosen for us, right? Like we were just born into a world where highways, parking lots, car infrastructure dominates just the way we get around and like even like the layout of our communities. And of course, all of this burdens low-income folks of color most while failing to benefit them. And really, that's like not an old story. That trend continues today with corporations like Uber, Lyft, scooter share companies, electric vehicle and autonomous vehicle companies really having more of a say in deciding how people move around than people do themselves. And of course, people of color can really face many financial, cultural, technological, or physical barriers to accessing and benefiting from these new mobility options. Which, for the record, I'm not saying are not beneficial or convenient mobility options. I use them all the time, but I'm saying that communities, particularly low-income communities of color, need their needs and decision-making to be front and centered. And so to respond to this gap, at Greenlining, we developed our Mobility Equity Framework, which is an equitable transportation planning tool that centers community needs and decision-making and has now been implemented and adapted in many parts of the country. But while centering community power in the planning process is very important, we also know we have to continue uplifting that community power in the implementation of those projects. And so a few years later, we published the Clean Mobility, a playbook, which outlines a variety of best practices, lessons learned from clean mobility equity pilots and programs that are community driven, some cases community owned. And I think what's important to emphasize here is that they're actually not just focused on increasing access to clean mobility. They're also focused on providing jobs, on building climate resilience, and providing anti-displacement plans. And so I share those examples to highlight that these types of community-driven planning and implementation practices are key to increasing access and reducing disparities because the people closest to the pain are closest to the solutions.
I would love to see that policy book because it sounds like you guys did a lot of work for it. I also wanted to add, I think making the issue relatable to people, to everyday people, that we're mentioning. I think for a really long time, it was a lobbying problem. It was a policy problem. But again, I think to a lot of our points is the people should be centered. And I think one of the things that we've been really working hard to doing even more, even thinking of like language access, is really relating it to everyday things that people, to the bus, to the air that we breathe, to low income, to poverty, to your point of economics, of making it something that they want to be a part of. Because I think like I think about my mom, I think about my family, like, are they involved in this conversation? They're the ones living in these neighborhoods. So I think in terms of narrative and storytelling, why these stories are so important, and we're putting, more intention behind it, is to also get all those other people who are not sometimes in our immediate circles of environmental justice.
I just want to take a moment and give some snaps to what you just all said. And also, Hannah, your quote, the people closest to pain are closest to solutions. That is so real and just so important to be thinking of. And I just think it's so important for us to be centering the communities that are most impacted, that don't have access to a lot of the convenient transportation modes that we all have. So you all kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to hear a little bit more on, we just hear so much about the environmental impact, about climate change and everything, just the environment, the world, the planet, but we don't really focus too much on the human impact of not adopting clean transportation. So I want to know from you what you all think the human toll of not embracing the future of clean transportation is. Oh, I think you're muted, Laura Kate.
Thank you. I think it's a double whammy because the same sources of, burning gasoline, burning diesel that contribute to climate change are also contributing to dangerous levels of air pollution. And so not only are we hit by the immediate health harms of that pollution and its health impacts short and long term, but then we're also hit by the additional health threats of climate change, which we and others in the health community often call a health emergency. And that's a whole range of impacts, from more particle pollution from wildfire smoke to unhealthy ozone days because of extreme heat, to the toll of heat itself, to the impacts of having your home flooded or having to evacuate. There's too many health impacts of climate change to count on top of the additional burdens of living with unhealthy air. And I think one thing I like to highlight is that, I think sometimes communications around this make it sound like, well, there's a general public that is less at risk and a small subset of the population that's at greater risk. And if you look at who that subset is, that is babies, children, older adults, pregnant people, people with asthma and other lung disease, people with heart disease and diabetes, people who work outdoors. That's on top of the fact that communities of color and low-income communities are also more likely to be located near polluting sources. I mean, that's at least someone in every family, if not most people. And that's who we're talking about when we're talking about people who are at disproportionate risk of health harm from not converting to zero emission transportation.
I always like to uplift a Harvard study that found that a person's commute time is the single greatest factor in their chances of escaping poverty, more than test scores or crime rates. And so I think what this tells us is that access to reliable, affordable, transportation, it's not just about moving people from A to B, it's really about moving people up the economic ladder. And so I envision this clean transportation revolution as a really key strategy to close the racial wealth gap. And a racial wealth gap that exists because of racist policies like redlining, slavery, the genocide of Native people, immigration policies, and many more. And so this is one step to right past wrongs. However, at the same time, clean transportation alone cannot fix everything, right? And that's why we have to be really intentional that our clean transportation investments don't just operate in a silo. And instead, we're being flexible and really cross-cutting across issue areas, whether that's housing, workforce development, education, climate resilience, and much more. And so again, I'd encourage folks to check out Greenlining's Clean Mobility Equity Playbook that highlights case studies of pilots and funding programs that embed these multi-sector approaches to complement our clean transportation investments.
Happy to go next. I wanted to build upon what Laura and Hannah said. If we think about the environmental issues we face, climate change, if there were had been no human activity, we probably wouldn't be in this situation where we have a climate crisis. So, the problem that we have, right, points to the solution is that the solution has to be human-centered. Just for your information, that transportation is the #1 sector that contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so it moved up. I think previously was the second sector, and now it's the #1 sector. And if we think about the technology revolution we had in transportation, we need to realize that technology alone will not be able to solve the problems that we face, right? The transportation issues, the climate change. So we have to think about how we can initiate a behavioral change. So there needs to be, technology is important, but also there needs to be a behavioral piece, when we think about clean transportation, right? So it's very important that we think about the human impact and we understand the human impact and promote that more sustainable human behavior. And I also wanted to share that the #1 innovation in transportation is actually not technology, is policy and determination. And we needed to really think about as a community, right? Think together that what kind of cities that we want to develop. That what type of transportation system we want to provide to future generations. And I think that determination is going to be very important, to get to a future that is desirable, that is that is clean.
Yeah, building on what everyone said, I think transportation at its core is about access. Can you easily get to what you need, whether it be going to the doctor, getting to a grocery store, getting to work or to school? Are you risking your life while getting there because of, the way our infrastructure has been shaped? Are you at risk of, getting hit by a vehicle while getting to or from the bus or riding your bike? When you're going to the places you need to go, do you see other people in your community? I think the toll of not embracing clean transportation is tied directly into people's health and well-being, from the health impacts to the mental health impacts. And, I think being in a community that has a lot of clean transportation options also lends itself to creating a deeper community connection. And that's critical to building power in different places.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's just so much of that research out there that's telling us these things, and so much information. And I think when we are thinking about research, we know that it's out there, but a lot of folks are not necessarily tapping into that research. They're not looking into it. It's not available, but we have things like you all are mentioning, a playbook from the Green Lining Institute, statistical reports coming from the American Lung Association, or something like a transportation and happiness map that is put together. And, all of those tools are so important. And I want to know from you all, Hannah, Laura Kate, and Dr. Fan, a lot of your work is clearly based on so much research. And I want to know, how do we package and present research in a way that is accessible and drives community action and policy change?
I can start. So we've published many reports, resources, frameworks over the years. And while there are, case studies, examples to make it as accessible and actionable, I'm not going to lie, a lot of them are very wonky and very heady. And to be honest, we could really use a lot of help of de-wonkifying them. However, where we do drive, action or aim to drive action is being very involved in the implementation of their recommendations. We don't want to put something out there that we can't boots on the ground, make it happen, whether that's through policy making, in the guidelines of programs and funding streams, in the implementation of programs, as well as the evaluation of those programs. And so while a lot of, the audience for that is definitely policymakers, decision makers, program administrators, we also do want those publications and recommendations to be accessible to under-resourced communities who have been redlined, exploited, ignored, and disinvested in. And so a huge function of our work is providing capacity building to those under-resourced communities. We have implemented a multi-year strategy of investing in local leadership, supporting communities to identify their own needs and visions, developing partnerships, building skills, and being able to access technical assistance resources to advance their projects, grants, or policies. So we've been doing this in 3 cities in California and in 5 states across the country. And really what this has required is just years of relationship and trust building. It's also required passing through funding directly to community-based organizations to support their staff and capacity needs so they can even participate in these kinds of conversations. And I think more importantly, it's really required us letting them take the lead. We can provide them with, research, case studies as resources and inspiration, but we are not trying to force anything there. Our role is really to bring folks together, to provide them with funding, resources, and information, and then empower them to advance their vision for clean mobility equity.
From the Lung Association's perspective, we are always so grateful that people use and cite our State of the Air report. We put it out every year, and I think the thing that has made it useful to people, at least the feedback that I get, is that it's localized. So we give grades to counties across the country and rankings to cities across the country for their levels of ozone and particle pollution. So we really try to translate at the local level, what is the quality of the air that I am breathing in my community? It's lung.org/SOTA. It comes out every April. So that's been helpful because not only can folks take it and get a sense of the air quality in their communities, but then they can use it in advocacy at the federal, but also the state and local levels as a proof point about why things need to change. The other big report we put out this year on air quality is called Zeroing In on Healthy Air, and it's all about the health benefits of a nationwide transition to zero emission transportation and zero emission electricity. And we did some modeling that looked at a nationwide benefit. We'll see over out through 2050, $1.2 trillion worth of health benefits, 110,000 lives saved. So huge numbers. But again, we also have numbers for states and for cities to help make it local for people. And we know that folks also find those numbers helpful. I've gotten different pieces of feedback from policymakers, that it's helpful to show that clean air protections pay for themselves. So we're happy to model the economic benefits, but it's also, easy to game economic benefits. So it's also helpful to have numbers like how many lives saved and how many asthma attacks avoided. So we try to do both.
Yes, so I would say that as a researcher, that we're not when we trained as a researcher, sometimes we're not trained to present the work in a way that is publicly accessible. Like, part of our job is to write up journal articles, and those journal articles probably will be reviewed by our peers and not necessarily generate a public impact. But luckily that the university, for example, I work at the University of Minnesota, a public university. There is increasing requirement that researchers conduct community engaged participatory work. And also I wanted to mention that nationally, some of the federal agencies such as the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Health, they increasingly require researchers to include a community engagement component in their grant proposals. I think those are the things that very positive. I also wanted to build upon what Peter said earlier, is that it's very important that whatever work we do, that those work are the type of work that people can relate to their everyday life, right? So I think it's very important that if we initiate a community-engaged participatory work, we have to engage the community throughout the research process. That means even when you define research question, is this research question community relevant, right? Do community feel related, that this is the question that they really care about and relevant? And then you start with a positive feedback loop, is that if the question is something that community really wants to answer as well, you involve the community throughout the research process. Once the findings are out, then the communities will actually want to work with you to disseminate the results, right? So you get a more impact, out of the work you do. So I want to emphasize that it's not only about presenting and the package, it's also about whether the research itself is a community engaged participatory work. And I also wanted to mention what Hannah suggested, is that when we include community members in our research projects, we have to compensate them in a way that is equitable, right? So we've been paid to do the work. When they participate, we have to think, very carefully that how we can compensate their time, right? And I think that's a very important aspect of community engaged participatory work.
Absolutely. And research is so important. And I think on the other side of research is storytelling, or it works in partnership with research. And so that's something we know all about at the Redford Center. But I really would love to hear from the filmmakers and storytellers on this call. Pita, Sonia, you both had films that were featured just earlier in this call. And I just want to know, in your experience, how has storytelling translated into mobilizing community action in your communities?
Yeah, one one thing that we've been doing is we've been doing a lot of, because we are a Spanish, a Latinx program, a lot of what we're doing is putting out content that is also in Spanish, and sharing it not only within our programs, but also with the media, also writing blogs, also collaborating with other people, collaborating with doctors, and collaborating just different people in the community. And I think that for us, moving forward, that's what we want to continue to do, and continue not just to the Latinx community, but also just people of color, because to Laura's point, it is elderly folks, it is babies, it's so many other people that we capture. So I know we're short on time, but I think for us, it's just a matter of like keep sharing stories, and people will get motivated and see themselves in those stories.
I totally agree about that. Even just working on this film in Trenton, a lot of that activity is in a specific neighborhood, and seeing that video, different parts of the city, we're like, well, we could do that too. So it's been really cool to see that conversation play out. But just like from my experience working in the policy world, the research and facts have like a critical role to play in shaping policy proposals. But storytelling is what actually does the changing of minds and getting people activated to support those policies and actions. So, I've been part of campaigns that have lasted more than a decade. And the thing that changed is that someone, something has gone from a longstanding issue to something that people are ready to pass because someone told a personal story about how this has impacted them. And, I think that's really critical. And that's where storytelling plays a really important role, because especially low income people of color and those who don't have access to the political system, they can't take off work in the middle of the day to testify at some hearing. Like, we need to find other ways to tell their stories and opportunities to get their voices heard. So I definitely think these two things work in tandem really well.
Yeah, there's so many tools out there that really fit everyone's liking. So whether you have friends that are into research or books or into documentaries or narrative films, suggest a way. I mean, it's so important to get engaged in this stuff and to engage the people in our lives with, the mediums that we know that they'll respond to. We have a quick audience question that I really want to ask you all, and maybe one or two people could handle the question just for time. But the question is, how do we incentivize more affluent people who would usually prefer to drive a vehicle?
Make them pay for their, use of roads, of the cars, all of the externalities of them. I think we're really interested in the concept of all kinds of pricing, congestion pricing, road pricing, as long as there are very clear, equity requirements around that to make sure that, folks aren't disproportionately burdened, and that the revenue we're collecting, we're reinvesting in walking, biking, transit infrastructure in low-income communities.
I would quickly add that invest in high quality public transportation system, invest in sidewalks, invest in bicycle lanes.
Yeah, just invest and pay and incentivize folks to really just feel the impact of their decision making. That's so real and so important. I guess, so all the issues we've talked about today that have been presented are present in communities across the country to varying degrees. But what would your advice be to folks who are looking to make an impact in their communities, but don't know where to start or how to get things rolling?
I think, one word of advice I have for people is to really just start by having conversations, talk to your neighbors and friends, see if there's a common thread that all of you think is something that is impacting your community, and start there. You could work together to figure out potential solutions. And there are tons of resources out there, as we've been hearing. And then from there, figure out who has the power to change that, or who could help you figure out who has that power. And then you'll start finding ways to influence that decision making and build your own power within the community.
I'd say just find a venue and show up. You don't need to have an expertise in policy. You are the expert on your community. And so if all you do is, show up to you look up your member of Congress's local office, or you go to a city council meeting and you begin to talk about the issues that are affecting you, that will be a pathway to open up more and more venues to share that. You don't need to wait for a formal policy proposal, or you have the expertise that you need.
Yeah, and you don't have to do it alone. I think the biggest takeaway from this, from the films, from this topic, and everything you've all shared is community, leaning on one another. So for our final question, I'd really just love to have each of you briefly define what the term community power means to you.
I can get started. Community power to me means being human-centered and people-centered. And also, I think it's very important that we focus on the most underserved communities in this process.
Yeah, I totally agree. And to me, it also means just the power of self-determination in our lives, as well as the power to connect with and collaborate with, fellow community members towards creating a more just and sustainable world.
To me, community power is really about individuals coming together to make decisions about where they live or where they work. It's about them coming up with solutions for their own community collaboratively and restructuring that balance of power so that they could take on other issues as well.
To me, communities have power not only at the community government level, but all the way up to the federal government and beyond. And so this really means being able to exercise and enjoy that power and expertise of what's best for their own community at every level.
And I think for me, a community power means change. That's how change happens, is by coming together.
Yeah, to quote Teo in the first clip from our Arizona film, Pita, your film, things happen because the community has power. And so that's just the biggest takeaway. And I just want to thank you all for your time today, for sharing your wisdom, life experiences, and inspiring hope, because we really need it now. And I can say personally that this conversation has been so healing and motivating. And I just want to thank you all for your leadership in this work. Audience, if you can join me in showing some love for our speakers in the chat. Thank you all so much for your time today. Before wrapping up, I just want to share a few quick announcements and opportunities for all of you tuning in today. The first is that the Redford Center's very own communications director, Kate Fitzwater, and community activist who you just saw featured in our Community Power Nevada film, Alexis Espuro, will be speaking at another virtual session tomorrow titled Climate Change and Extreme Weather Virtual Summit, Taking Action with Data. The session is presented by AccuWeather and Plume Labs, and it's going to be taking place at 6:30 a.m. Pacific Time and 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. For the filmmakers and storytellers on this call, the Redford Center has 2 upcoming opportunities to fund your next film project. The first opportunity is our NRDC Climate Storytelling Fellowship. We're partnering with NRDC's Rewrite the Future program, the Blacklist, and the CAA Foundation to launch a second iteration of the NRDC Climate Storytelling Fellowship. The fellowship will grant $20,000 each to 3 winners whose feature screenplay or pilot script reflects the climate crisis in a compelling, realistic, and thoughtful way. Applications are open until November 30th. Learn more at theblacklist.com. And the second opportunity is our Nature Connection pitch, presented in partnership with If Then Shorts. The Nature Connection pitch is an open call for filmmakers to share their short documentary works in progress, focusing on connecting or reconnecting with nature. Up to 5 filmmakers will be chosen to join us for a pitch and professional development workshop series at Big Sky Film Festival 2023. The participating projects will each receive $5,000 in production grants along with career building training. And the deadline to apply for that is October 3rd. To learn more, visit fieldofvision.org/Redford Center 2023. Thank you all for making the intentional and inspiring decision to take the time out of your day and busy schedules to join us for this important conversation. I hope this conversation and these stories move you, inspire you to take action, and stay with you as you continue to find your place in this movement and harness your community power. Thank you and have a wonderful day and rest of your week.